Morning, this is Travis Stenick. We're going to continue on reading Psycho-Cybernetics in Chapter 5, How to Utilize the Power of Rational Thinking. And many of my patients are plainly disappointed when I prescribe something as simple as using their God given power of reason as a method of changing negative beliefs and behavior. To some, it seems incredibly naive and unscientific, yet it does have one advantage: it works. And as we shall see later, it's based upon sound scientific findings. There's a widely accepted fallacy that rational, logical, conscious thinking has no power over unconscious processes or mechanisms, and that to change negative beliefs, feelings, or behavior, it's necessary to dig down and dredge up material from the unconscious. Your automatic mechanism, or what the Freudians call the unconscious, is absolutely impersonal. It operates as a machine and has no will of its own. It always tries to react appropriately to your current beliefs and interpretations concerning environment, and it always seeks to give you appropriate feelings and accomplish the goals which you've consciously determined upon it. It only works upon the data with which you feed it in the form of ideas, beliefs, interpretations, and opinions. It is conscious thinking, which is the control knob of your unconscious machine. It's it was by conscious thought alone that, through perhaps irrational and unrealistic, that the unconscious machine developed its negative and inappropriate reaction patterns. And it's by conscious rational thought that the automatic reaction patterns can be changed. You're not predetermined in this life. You're set out based off of your parents, your genetics. You can change. The late Dr. John A. Schindler of the famous Monroe Clinic, Monroe, Wisconsin, won nationwide fame for his outstanding success in helping unhappy, neurotic people regain the joy of living and return to productive, happy lives. His percentage of cures far exceeded that of psychoanalysts. One of the keys of his method of treatment is what we call the conscious thought control. Regardless of the omissions and commissions of the past, he said, a person has to start in the present to acquire some maturity so that the future may be better than the past. The present and the future depend on learning new habits and new ways and looking at old problems. There simply isn't any future in digging continually into the past. The underlying emotional problem has the same common denominator in every patient. This common denominator is that the patient's forgotten how or probably never learned how to control his present thinking to produce enjoyment. Let sleeping dogs lie. The fact that there are buried in the unconscious memories of the past failures, unpleasant and painful experiences doesn't mean that these must be dug out, exposed, or examined in order to effect personality changes. As we pointed out earlier, all skill learning is accomplished by trial and error. By making a trial, missing the mark, consciously remembering the degree of error, and making correction on the next trial until finally a hit or a successful attempt is accomplished. The successful reaction pattern is then remembered or recalled and imitated on future trials. This is that whole negative feedback loop we were talking about 2 chapters ago. This is true for a man learning to pitch horseshoes, throw darts, sing, drive a car, play golf, get along socially with other human beings, or any other skill. It's also true of a mechanical rat learning its way through a maze. Thus, all servo mechanisms, by their very nature, contain memories of past errors, failures, painful and negative experiences. These negative experiences do not inhibit but contribute to the learning process as long as they're used properly as negative feedback data and are seen as deviations from the positive goal with which is desired. However, as soon as the error has been recognized as such and correction, of course, made, it's equally important that the error be consciously forgotten and the successful attempt remembered and dwelt upon. These memories of past failures, they do not harm as long as our conscious thought and attention is focused upon the positive goal to be accomplished. Therefore, it's best to let these sleeping dogs lie. Our errors, mistakes, failures, and sometimes even our humiliations were necessary steps in the learning process. However, they were meant to be means to an end, and not an end in themselves. When they have served their purpose, they should be forgotten. If we consciously dwell upon the error, or consciously feel guilty about the error and keep berating ourselves because of it, then unwittingly the error of failure itself becomes the goal. Guys, did you just hear that? If we are trying to accomplish something great in our lives and making change, but we keep bringing up and reliving the past experiences of the life change we don't want to have, You will be programming your subconscious mind that that is the target, that which you dwell on, you focus on, grows in your mind. The weeds and the flowers of the mind, you will focus on the weeds and magnify and nurture them with the environment of your thinking and feeling, rather than nurturing the flowers to grow in the garden that you want, the life outcome that you want and desire. So the error of failure itself becomes the goal, which is consciously held in imagination and memory. The unhappiest of mortals is that man who insists upon reliving the past over and over again in imagination, continually criticizing himself for past mistakes, continually condemning himself for past sins. I shall never forget one of my women patients who tortured herself with her unhappy past, so much so that she destroyed any chance for happiness in the present. She lived for years in bitterness and resentment, and as a direct result of a serious hairlip that caused her to shun people and to develop over the years, a personality that was stunted, crabby, and completely turned against the world had everything in it. She had no friends because she imagined that no one would be friendly with a person who looked so awful. She deliberately avoided people, or she, what it was worse is consistently she just alienated people with her sour defensive attitude. Surgery cured her physical problem. She tried to make the adjustment and to begin living with people in harmony and friendliness, but found that her past experiences kept getting in the way. She felt that despite her new appearance, she couldn't make friends and be happy because no one would forgive her for what she'd been doing before the operation. She wound up making the same mistakes that she had before, and she was as unhappy as ever. She didn't really begin to live until she learned to stop condemning herself for what she'd been in the past and to stop reliving in her imagination all the unhappy events that had brought her to my office for surgery in the first place. Continually criticizing yourself for past mistakes and errors, it doesn't help matters. But on the other hand, it tends to perpetuate the very behavior that you want to change. So give yourself grace if you didn't stick to the exercise routine. Don't give up, but don't beat yourself up either. Memories of past failures can adversely affect present performance if we dwell upon them and foolishly conclude, I failed yesterday, therefore it follows that I will fail again today. However, this doesn't prove that unconscious reaction patterns have any power in themselves to repeat and perpetuate themselves, or that all buried memories of failure must be eradicated before behavior can be changed. Hear that last sentence again. You don't need to completely eliminate and change yourself to change. Slow incremental steps over time, but it's consistency. Consistency on the positive feeling, thinking emotions that you're trying to accomplish those goals in life rather than nurturing the errors of the past. Because subconsciously, you're programming that as your homing missile. You're seeking target. You will eventually arrive to that target, like this lady's example here. If we're victimized, it's by our own conscious, our thinking mind, and by the unconscious. For it's with the thinking part of our personality that we draw conclusions and select goal images that we shall concentrate upon. The minute that we change our minds and stop giving power to the past with it, mistakes lose power over us. So ignore past failures and forge ahead. Here again, hypnosis furnishes convincing proof that when a shy, timid wallflower is told in hypnosis and believes or thinks that he's a bold, self confident orator, his reaction patterns are changed instantly. He currently acts as he currently believes. His attention is given over completely to the positive desired goal, and no thought or consideration whatsoever is given to past failures. Dorothea Brandy tells in her charming book, Wake Up and Live, how this one idea enabled her to become more productive and successful as a writer, and to draw upon talents and abilities that she never knew that she had. She'd been both curious and amazed after witnessing a demonstration in hypnosis. And she happened to read one sentence written by psychologist F.M.H. Myers, which she says changed her entire life. The sentence by Myers explained that the talents and abilities displayed by hypnotic subjects were due to a purgation of memory of past failures while in the hypnotic state. If this were possible under hypnosis, Miss Brandy asked herself, If ordinary people carried around within themselves talents, abilities, powers which were held and not used merely because of memories or past failures, then why couldn't a person in the wakeful state use these same powers by ignoring past failures and acting as if it were impossible to fail? She determined to try it. She would act on the assumption that the powers and abilities were there and that she could use them. If only she would go ahead and act as if, instead of in a tentative, half hearted way. Within a year, her production as a writer had increased many times. So had her sales. A rather surprising result was that she discovered a talent for public speaking, became much in demand as a lecturer, and enjoyed it. Whereas previously she'd not only shown no talent for lecturing, but disliked it intensely. Bertrand Russell's method. In his book, The Conquest of Happiness, Bertrand Russell says, I wasn't born happy. As a child, my favorite hymn was Weary of Earth and Laden with Sin. In adolescence, I hated life and was continually on the verge of suicide, from which, however, I was restrained by the desire to know more mathematics. Now, on the contrary, I enjoy life. I might almost say that with every year that passes, I enjoy it more. Very largely, it's due to diminishing preoccupation with myself, but like others who had a Puritan education, I had a habit of meditating on my sins, follies, and shortcomings. I seemed to myself, no doubt justly, a miserable specimen. Gradually, I learned to be indifferent to myself and my deficiencies. I came to center my attention upon external objects, the state of the world, various branches of knowledge, individuals for whom I felt affection. In the same book, he describes his methods for changing automatic reaction patterns based upon false beliefs. It's quite possible to overcome infantile suggestions of the unconscious, and even to change the contents of the unconscious by employing the right kind of technique. Whenever you begin to feel remorse for an act which your reason tells you is not wicked, examine the causes of your feelings of remorse and convince yourself in detail of their absurdity. Let your conscious beliefs be so vivid and emphatic that they make an impression upon your unconscious strong enough to cope with the impressions made by your nurse or your mother when you were an infant. I'm just going to read that one more time and let that sink in. So let your conscious beliefs be so vivid and emphatic that they make an impression upon your unconscious strong enough to cope with the impressions made by your nurse or your mother when you were an infant. That's huge. It's asking us to have an emotional response in our body that is so strong that it creates lasting memory, strong enough as our first imprint in our soul. Our mothers, our nursing, whoever nursed us when we were infants, when we were babies. Wow, that's pretty big. Don't be content with an alteration between moments of rationality, excuse me, and moments of irrationality. Look into the irrationality closely with a determination not to respect it and not to let it dominate you. When it thrusts foolish thoughts or feelings into your consciousness, pull them up by the roots, examine them, and just reject them. Do not allow yourself to remain a vacillating creature swayed half by reason and half by infantile folly. So when you're standing on the riverbank and the crap of life floats down the river, just observe it. You can feel it and experience it, but let it go. Let it fall down the river. Let it float down the river. Don't jump in the river and latch on to the logs of shit and let it take you down the river of life, carrying this baggage, this folly, as he says. Just let it go. Give yourself grace. We're all humans. And just let it go. But if the rebellion is to be successful in bringing individual happiness and enabling a man to live consistently by one standard, not to vacillate between two, it's necessary that he should think and feel deeply about what his reason tells him. Most men, when they've thrown off superficially the superstitions of their childhood, they think that there's no more to be done. They don't realize that these superstitions are still lurking underground. When a rational conviction's been arrived at, it's necessary to dwell upon it, to follow out its consequences, and to search out in oneself whatever beliefs inconsistent with the new conviction might otherwise survive. What I suggest is that a man should make up his mind with emphasis as to what he rationally believes, and should never allow contrary irrational beliefs to pass unchallenged or obtain a hold over him, however brief. This is a question of reasoning with himself in those moments in which he's tempted to become infantile, but the reasoning, if it's sufficiently emphatic, may be very brief. Ideas are changed not by will, but by other ideas. It can be seen that Bertrand Russell's technique of searching out ideas which are inconsistent with some deeply felt conviction is essentially the same the method tested clinically with such amazing success by Prescott Lecky. Lecky's method consisted of getting the subject to see that their negative concept of his was inconsistent with some other deeply held belief. Lecky believed that it was inherent in the very nature of mind itself that all ideas and concepts which make up the total content of personality must seem to be consistent with each other. If the inconsistency of a given idea is consciously recognized, it must be rejected. One of my patients was a salesman who was scared to death when calling upon big shots. His fear and nervousness were overcome in just one counseling session, during which I asked him, "Would you physically get down on all fours and crawl into the man's office, prostrating yourself before a superior personage?" "I should say not," he bristled. "Then why do you mentally cringe and crawl?" Another question. "Would you go into a man's office with your hand out like a beggar and beg for a dime and a cup of coffee?" "Certainly not." Well, can't you see that you're doing that essential same thing when you're going in overly concerned with whether or not he'll approve of you? Can't you see that you have your hand out literally begging for his approval and acceptance of you as a person? Lucky found that there were two powerful levers for changing belief in concepts. There are the standard convictions, which are strongly held by nearly everyone. These are one, the feeling of belief that one's capable of doing his share, holding up his end of the log, exerting a certain amount of independence, and two, the belief that there's something inside you which should not be allowed to suffer indignities. Examine and reevaluate your beliefs. One of the reasons that the power of rational thinking goes unrecognized is that it's so seldom used. Trace down the belief about yourself, or the belief about the world, or other people, which is behind your negative behavior. Does something always happen to cause you to miss out just when success seems within your grasp? Perhaps you secretly feel unworthy of success, or that you don't deserve it. Are you ill at ease around other people? I mean, perhaps you believe you're inferior to them, or that other people, per se, are hostile and unfriendly. Do you become anxious and fearful for no good reason in a situation that's relatively safe? I mean, perhaps you believe the world that you live in is hostile, unfriendly, dangerous place, or that you deserve punishment. Remember that both behavior and feeling spring from belief. To root out the belief which is responsible for you feeling and behavior, ask yourself why. Is there some task with which you would like to do, some channel in which you would like to experience or express yourself, but you hang back feeling that I can't? Well, ask yourself why. If you felt like you're never going to accomplish the dreams and goals that you're after because you keep getting reinforced of failure in your life or meeting challenges that you just can't seem to overcome, well, ask yourself why. Why is that? Why is everyone else seemingly successful and I'm not? Next sentence, why do I believe that I can't? Then ask yourself, is this belief based upon actual fact or upon an assumption or a false conclusion? I'm going to make commentary, but I'm going to read these questions. Ask yourself these questions. Is there any rational reason for such a belief? Could it be that I'm mistaken in this belief? Would I come to the same conclusion about some other person in a similar situation? And why should I continue to act and feel as if this was true if there's no good reason to believe it? So, what I was going to say before I read those was oftentimes we tell ourselves stories. We're overarching stories of absolute, meaning everything or never, always. We're extreme in our comments. Everyone is succeeding and I'm not. I'm not saying that isn't true. What I'm saying in this chapter is asking us to question those beliefs. Is it possible that I'm mistaken in this belief? That was the second bullet point. Is there a rational reason for such a belief? Well, if all I'm doing is experiencing the world and paying attention to those people that are successful and validating and justifying that I'm not because I'm just not able to make it happen. I'm just trying really hard for years and years and years. Then that is how my belief is conditioned. But is it possible that there's really no good reason to believe that? And it's possible to maybe think differently? Is it possible that not everyone is successful, but maybe the people I'm focusing on are successful? What if I started to focus on people who are just like me or worse off? What if I started to focus on people around me that were not succeeding in the way I want to in life? What if I started to magnify and intensify those things? Now, maybe my thoughts might change a little bit. Maybe I leveled the playing field and I'm no longer an absolute failure in my attempt for success in my life. But now I'm just like everyone else. Did you hear me? With an absolute everyone. It's the same as always and never. It's very absolute, but guess what it'll do is it'll start to open your mind and change and think differently. I'm not encouraging you to start to think in this way. I'm just asking you to question your beliefs and challenge them. Are they real? Imagined? Where did I come up with this idea? Is it possible to think the opposite, contrary to this? Is it possible that I could be successful? Is it possible that I just maybe haven't figured out the right way of thinking yet? Is it possible that someone else out there might already know it and I just haven't acquired the knowledge? Or maybe I have the knowledge, but I've somehow not tapped into it somehow. This is what we're beginning to explore here as we read through these chapters is this personal self-reflection. Oftentimes we have the answers within us. We don't seem to question those beliefs which we so dearly hold as truth. So just do a little personal reflection on the thing that's causing you a problem in life and ask, is this true? Number one, is there any rational reason for such a belief? Number two, could it be that I'm mistaken in this belief? Number three, would I come to the same conclusion about some other person in a similar situation? Or am I just condemning myself? And number four, why should I continue to act and feel as if this were true if there's really no good reason to believe it? Don't just pass these questions by casually. Wrestle with them. Think hard on them. Get emotional about them. Ask yourself questions and then keep going back with why every single time you answer your question until it makes you cry. You get to the root cause of your deep core beliefs or your motivations, it should stir you up emotionally. And if you haven't gotten there yet, then you haven't dug deep enough. And you see that you've cheated yourself and sold yourself short, not because of a fact, but only because of some stupid belief. If so, try to arouse some indignation or even anger. Indignation and anger can sometimes act as liberators for false ideas. Alfred Adler got mad at himself, and as his teacher, he was enabled to throw off a negative definition of himself. This experience isn't uncommon. An old farmer said he quit tobacco for good one day when he discovered that he left his tobacco home and started to walk the 2 miles for it. On the way, he saw that he was being used in a humiliating way by a habit. He got mad, he turned around, he went back to the field, and he never smoked again. Clarence Darrow, the famous attorney, said his success started by the day that he got mad when he attempted to secure a mortgage for $2,000 to buy a house. Just as this transaction was about to be completed, the lender's wife spoke up and said, "Don't be a fool. He'll never make enough money to pay it off." Darrow himself had serious doubts about the same thing. But something happened when he heard her remark. He became indignant both at the woman and at himself, and he determined that he would be a success. A businessman friend of mine who had a very similar experience, a failure at 40, continually worried about how things would be or how things would come out, but his own inadequacies and whether or not he'd be able to complete each business venture. Fearful and anxious, he was attempting to purchase some machinery on credit. When the man's wife objected, she didn't believe that he'd ever be able to pay for it. At first, his hopes were dashed, but when he became indignant, who was he to be pushed around like that? Who was he to skulk through the world, continually fearful of failure? The experience awakened something within him, some new self, and at once He saw that this woman's remark, as well as his own opinions of himself, were an affront to something. This something. He had no money, no credit, and no way to accomplish what he wanted, but he found a way. And within 3 years, he was more successful than he'd ever dreamed of being, not in one business, but in three. The power of deep desire. Rational thought to be effective in changing belief and behavior must be accompanied by deep feeling and desire. Picture to yourself what you'd like to be and have, and assume for the moment that such things might be possible. Arouse a deep desire for these things and become enthusiastic about them. Dwell upon them and keep going over them in your mind, going over them in your mind, and present negative beliefs that were formed by thought plus feelings. Generate enough emotion or deep feeling, and your new thoughts and ideas will cancel them out. If you'll just analyze this, you'll see that you're using a process that you've often used before: worry. The only difference is that you change your goals from negative to positive. When you worry, you first of all picture some undesirable future outcome or goal very vividly in your imagination. You use no effort or willpower, but you keep dwelling upon the end result and you keep thinking about it, dwelling upon it, picturing it to yourself as a possibility. You play with the idea that it might happen. This constant repetition and thinking in terms of possibilities, it makes the end result appear more and more real to you. After a time, appropriate emotions are automatically generated: fear, anxiety, discouragement. All these are appropriate to the undesirable result that you're worrying about. Now change the goal picture, and you can easily generate good emotions. Constantly picturing to yourself and dwelling upon a desirable end result will make you almost possibility seem this thing to be more real. And again, appropriate emotions of enthusiasm, cheerfulness, encouragement, and happiness will automatically be generated. In forming good emotional habits and in breaking bad ones, said Dr. Knight Dunlap, we have to deal primarily with thought and thought habits. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. What rational thought can and cannot do. Remember that your automatic mechanism, it can as easily function as a failure mechanism, as a success mechanism, depending upon the data that you give it to process and the goals that you set for it. It's basically a goal striving mechanism. The goals it works upon are up to you. Many of the unconsciously and unwittingly, by holding negative attitudes and habitually picturing failures to ourselves in our imagination, set up goals of failure. Also remember that your automatic mechanism, it doesn't reason about nor question the data you feed it. It merely processes it and reacts appropriately to it. It's very important that the automatic mechanism be given true facts concerning the environment. This is the job of conscious rational thought: to know the truth, to form correct evaluations, estimations, opinions. In this connection, most of us are prone to underestimate ourselves and overestimate the nature of the difficulty facing us. Always think of what you have to do as easy, and it will become so, said Emily Couillet. I've made extensive experiments to discover the common causes of that conscious effort which freezes the thinking mind, says psychologist Daniel W. Joslin. Practically always, it seems to be that due to the tendency to exaggerate the difficulty and importance of your mental labors and to take them too seriously and fear they will find you incapable. People who are eloquent in casual conversation become imbeciles when they mount the speaker's platform. You simply must learn that if you can interest the neighbor, you can interest all the neighbors or the world and not be frozen by magnitudes. So basically, he's talking about, like, how we have this fear of public speaking. We don't have the fear of private speaking, one to one or one to a few, but somehow when we start speaking in front of a bunch of people, our adrenaline starts pumping, our dumping, our heart starts pumping, we start sweating, getting clammy hands, and we feel this fear as if we're dying just to speak in front of a larger audience or to be highlighted as speaking, meaning maybe you're on a podium, or you know the uh, the table at which you're eating at a dinner party, you have to stand up and speak. It's interesting. Anyway, okay. You'll never know until you try. So it's the job of a rational conscious thought to examine and analyze incoming messages, to accept those which are true and reject those which are untrue. Many people are bowled over by this chance remark of a friend: "You don't look so well this morning." If they rejected or snubbed this by someone, they would blindly swallow the fact that this means that they're an inferior person. Most of us are subjected to negative suggestions every day. But if our conscious mind is working on the job, we don't have to accept them blindly. It ain't necessarily so is a good motto. Let it just roll off your shoulder. It's somebody else's belief or opinion. But if we are already reinforced with our subconscious mind and our belief systems, and we hear those thoughts or statements from someone else, then yes, we will start to believe them as true. It's the job of the conscious rational mind to form logical and correct conclusions. I failed once in the past, so I'll probably fail in the future. It's neither logical nor rational to conclude I can't in advance without trying, and in the absence of any evidence on the contrary, is not rational. We should be more like the man who was asked if he could play the piano. I don't know, he said. What do you mean you don't know? I've never tried. Decide what you want and not what you don't want. It's the job of conscious, rational thought to decide what you want, select the goals you wish to achieve, and concentrate upon these rather than upon what you don't want. Spend time and effort concentrating upon what you don't want is not rational. When President Eisenhower was General Eisenhower in World War II, he was asked what he would have been had the effect upon the Allied cause if the invasion troops had been thrown back into the sea from the beaches of Italy. It would have been very bad, he said, but I never allow my mind to think of it in that way. You understand? Even though if the world around you looks like it's crumbling and falling apart, it's what's going on inside of you that determines your emotional state and the outcomes that you perceive as reality in your real world. So Eisenhower was goal focused and he would never allow himself to think of what would have happened if the troops would have been thrown back into the sea from the beaches of Italy. It would have been bad, but he never allowed his mind to think of it in that way. Keep your eye on the ball. It's the job of your conscious mind to pay strict attention to the task at hand, to what you're doing and what's going on around you so that these incoming sensory messages, they can keep your automatic mechanism currently advised of the environment and allow it to respond spontaneously. In baseball parlance, you must keep your eye on the ball. It's not the job of your conscious rational mind, however, to create or to do the job at hand. We get into trouble when we either neglect or use conscious thinking in the way that it's meant to be used, or when we attempt to use it in a way that was never meant to be used. We can't squeeze creative thought out of the creative mechanism by making conscious effort. We cannot do the job to be done by making strained conscious efforts. And because we try and cannot, we become concerned, anxious, frustrated. The automatic mechanism is unconscious. We cannot see the wheels turning. We cannot know what is taking place beneath the surface. Because it works spontaneously in reacting to present and current needs, we can have no intimation or certified guarantee in advance that it will come up with this answer. We're forced into a position of trust, and only by trusting and acting do we receive signs and wonders. In short, conscious rational thought selects the goal, rather, gathers information, concludes, evaluates, estimates, and starts the wheels in motion. It is not, however, responsible for results. We must learn to do our work and act upon the best assumptions available and leave the results to take care of themselves. End of chapter 5. Points to remember and the case history at the end as far as our daily tasks. That last statement was talking about the outcome, the end goal, and the focus in mind. That's our job. Our job is to go to the restaurant in life, the universal restaurant, and place our order. We have a thought first, the creative, the seed, the positive terminal or negative terminal, whichever one you want to decide is on the one side. That's the first thought, the thing that we want. Once we enter the universal restaurant of life and we submit our order to the universal waiter, then it's our job just to sit back and enjoy the good food and the good service and expect the results to be delivered to us. That's the other side of the terminal. So, first is the thought, and the second is the actual realization, the completion of it. Completes that circuit and the light switch goes on. But oftentimes we get in the middle and we say, well, like, what are the process or the steps or how's it going to happen, or I don't even know. I've got this timeline thing, I've got this financial thing, I got this relational conflict thing, I've got, my health thing going on. Like, how is this going to happen? It seems unrealistic. But that's not our job. Our job is not to go back into the restaurant and once the universal waiter took our order back to the universal chef and go like, "Hey chef, like I'm going to show you how to make this meal even though that you are more qualified and better suited to provide me with the best meal that I requested my order to you, but I'm going to ask you, hey, like did you make any substitutions? Like no, this is not how it's meant to be." And if we do, we get in the way, we start dinking around in the kitchen, we're going to end up with a less or a more inferior result than which we would have just let go of the results, let go of the process by which it's going to happen, and just trust and believe that it will happen. Because that's how it is when you go to the restaurant. Do any of you question, you know, am I going to get my food? Now, some restaurants maybe, okay, but on the average restaurant that you go to, when you submit your order, aren't you just expecting to receive the food and enjoy the good food and enjoy the good service? Well, that's how the universal uh, restaurant in life works. We must learn to do our work, act upon the best assumptions available, and leave results to take care of themselves. Because that's what happens. They automatically take care of themselves. Until next time.